Hello and welcome to our next session of Drop in PD or Math Dive in 5, focusing on measurement benchmarks and conversions. I'm Emily DeVizio.
And I'm Joe Rutaski.
So prior to starting this session, you're going to want to scan the QR scan code there and download the different documents that you'll need to complete the task that you see on this slide.
So go ahead and pause the video now and go do that task. You'll get more out of it doing that task before you see the rest of the video, for
Definitely.
sure. And don't forget to go to Canvas to get credit for your PD points for each of these units.
So today we're really going to focus on the different stages of measurement instruction. The first one you see here, definition and comparison. This is where really students are exploring with measurement and coming up with their own definitions through comparing items without using specific units.
That sounds a lot like what they would have done in the primary grades, right?
Absolutely, and still continues into intermediate grades as well with different types of measurement. Also, we will be focusing a little bit on the non-standard units as well, and that's where they're actually using something as a non-standard unit to repetitively measure.
So I'm thinking those two is actually like our angles, where we use the wedges.
That's a great
wedges
connection.
as our non-standard unit, and we would put angles right on top of each other to directly comparison. So thinking back to those, reflecting on those, we did that with our angles in fourth grade.
That's a great connection, and I would also encourage you all today, as we're going through the slides, to connect to which stage of measurement the task actually relates to. And then lastly, we're very familiar with standard units, where we actually physically use the tool to measure with standard units.
All right, this is what your task was, the woodworking task. So essentially, we're giving kids a real world task where they're working on some different projects around the house. They're having to go buy wood to complete the projects. But, you know, if I was trying to build a bench, I can't just carry that bench into Home Depot when I'm getting the wood. I have to have my plans and my measurements before I leave the house.
Well, what happens if your plans don't come to fruition because it is a different unit of measure that they're using?
So I measured the length of this bench in dark green units. I see it's 3 units long. So I'm just going to go and buy 3 dark green units of wood.
Oh no, you get to the store and guess what? They only sell wood in red units.
But I didn't measure in red.
We're now going to have to figure out how many reds is equivalent to 1 green.
All right, so you should have done this in your task and noticed that 1 dark green is equal to 3 of your red units.
So we're going from a larger unit to a smaller unit of measure.
So I must divide them, right?
I don't know.
Oh no, I must multiply.
I don't know.
Yeah, I forget.
I wasn't taught the procedure.
Okay, well, let's figure it out. So I can imagine for each of these greens, there'd be 3 reds on top, right? So I see 3 groups. There'd be 3 in each. So 3 groups of 3 would be
9.
Multiplication.
And I think we could make a great connection for that to the actual table that would show the pattern.
Yep, there's our reds in case you don't believe us. But yes, we could create a table so that in the future, if I make the mistake of measuring in dark greens and I only have reds, maybe I can pull out like my reference table that tells me how many greens are equivalent to a red.
Well, Joe, if you're talking about the reference sheet on FSA, there are no greens to reds on there.
No, obviously these are non-standard units, but this same thinking is going to apply to what they're doing with their standard units.
If I have understanding of why I'm using which operation, if I'm converting from big to small or small to big, definitely.
Yes. So this was part of the task. You'd basically create your Cuisenaire rod reference sheet and then apply this with our different lengths. So try this with kids, especially in fourth grade. This is a very concrete task, visiting this whole idea of converting between units.
I definitely think it's a great introduction to conversion, simply as you referenced earlier with using the wedges as an introduction to learning about angles.
Wedges and degrees, right? So now we're measuring in purple units. We see how many purples I needed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 purples. But they only sell in brown. So this one's a little different. I would maybe look for chunks of purple. Every 2 purple would be equal to 1 of my browns.
So we're going from a smaller unit to a larger unit. Is this something that we address currently in fourth grade?
It's not specifically in the standard that they'll be assessed with, but it doesn't mean that we don't want our students to experience so they understand the reasoning of why they would use multiplication versus why they would use division.
And I think if we're just teaching them conceptually and building understanding, it helps them to problem solve and see the connection.
Absolutely. They're not just learning every time I convert, I'm going to multiply.
Right.
Because in 5th grade, that's going to fail them. And actually, when we look at the new BEST standards, this is now, both of them are in 4th anyway.
Oh.
So we can do a table too. Here's our purples to browns. And we would see maybe this time we are dividing instead. Or thinking reverse multiplication too.
Could even be a great challenge problem for our students to enrich them.
Yeah. And we'll just look at one more. I'm sure you get the gist of what this task is having kids do. Here we're measuring in reds. Instead, we see they're only in white units. So again, I have 7 reds. I would have 2 whites in each of those, so 7 groups of 2. But now maybe I don't need that concrete anymore. Once you're telling me that for every 1 red, there's 2 whites, I could draw a bar model. I can have a representation.
As I say, we're moving now more towards representation, but making that connection to the concrete.
Yes. So I've got my concrete Cuisenaire rods, my bar models, my representation, my equations, my abstract. Also, again, we could just make a table, which is also an abstract. But you see how we're building up. We could be converting between feet to inches. We could be converting between volume.
Mm-hmm. Any
anything.
conversions, yep.
I can still draw that bar model, even if I can't concretely represent it. I know that bar model, what it's picturing in my head.
Could do it with capacity, and gallons and pints and anything.
Absolutely.
And here you see the visual that we share with you every session, but it's just showing you concrete examples, representational examples, and abstract examples. But remember, it's a continuum, and you can go in between each of those and back and forth, keep it fluid, especially when you're going from one unit of measure to another.
So just quickly, we had mentioned some changes with the BEST standards as we transition next year from maths to BEST. Here's your current standards in this unit.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the BEST, we see there is a moved standard. It's going to be new at 4th grade. This was in our primary, but essentially recognizing what tools are appropriate to measure specific attributes of different objects.
I love the clarifications that are there too, so I know specifically what it's asking. It's very explicit.
And then for M12 is converting again. There's not really anything different other than the fact that we can go between from larger unit to smaller unit or smaller unit to larger unit. And of course, we're going to solve real world problems. In maths, it was not mentioned that these could be multi-step unless you looked at the ALDs and it was ALD 4. I like that with BEST. It specifically tells you up to 2-step word problems. So your overall changes.
Just summarizing basically what we've talked about.
And looking at now, temperature is now included in possible measurements as well.
Thank you guys for joining us today. We hope that you gained some valuable information, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Math and Dive in 5.